Hello friends, my name is Hans Rufert with the Gastric Cancer Foundation, and this is the Gesundheit Kitchen. It's a series that we like to do somewhat regularly to kind of discuss nutrition and that connection between what we eat and how we feel, particularly in reference to those that are somewhat GI compromised. As if you've seen any of the shows, you know I don't have a stomach, but I was recently sort of handed a new card in my medical journey, which is I now have osteopenia and osteoporosis. Now I think you probably have heard of osteoporosis, which is sort of the advanced stage of bone loss. Essentially, the bones start to kind of lose their calcium content. Osteopenia, which I had never heard that word before, is sort of the precursor to osteoporosis. So I think anytime you have any diagnosis, you learn a whole new vocabulary. So osteopenia was a new word for me. But my first reaction was to reach out to my friend, Dr. Ellen Steinberg, who is my nutritionist friend. You've seen her on here in the Gesundheit Kitchen. We've talked about a lot of nutrition issues. To ask her, what can I do with my compromised GI system to get more calcium? And of course, the thing we always think of is dairy. And for a lot of folks without a stomach, consuming dairy, swallowing, chewing it isn't the issue, but digesting dairy can be a little rough on the system. So we try to look for dairy that has already been outsourced for digestion. So things, and what I mean by that, of course, are cultured dairy, things like cheese, certain cheeses, like buttermilk, like sour cream, cultured sour cream, and of course, yogurt. So she also kind of introduced me to a range of foods. In fairness, she didn't introduce them to me. I knew these foods, I just didn't know how calcium rich they were. So I wanted to put together just one meal, or a salad in this case, that features a lot of those calcium rich foods that are easy to digest, especially again if you have a compromised GI system. So with that in mind, she sent me a list of things, dark leafy greens. And so I've got some spinach that that's gonna be the base of our salad. The thing that I thought was most interesting is that I've been shooting for Greek yogurt. Every time I use yogurt, I'm going for Greek yogurt because it has a higher protein content. But what's interesting is that the calcium component really is in the whey, the WHEY component, which is that sort of the watery component of regular yogurt. And you can kind of see that clear liquid sitting right there on the top. That is the whey component. So standard plain yogurt is it's got a higher calcium content, but it's not as thick as the Greek yogurt. So it's going to be perfect for a creamy salad dressing. So that's what I'm going to kind of work on, and then we'll add in some more of these high calcium ingredients. I typically don't measure anything, but I actually did kind of write down some measurements for this particular salad dressing, which we'll share in the comments. So having said that, what I'm putting together now will probably not be exact to the recipe because that's just not how I work. But the basis is, again, this plain yogurt, not vanilla. And I stress that because I've done things in the past where I've said plain yogurt, people buy the vanilla, and then whatever they're making comes out way too sweet, or obviously very vanilla if you're making something savory. I'm using, in this case, it looks like about a half a cup. Again, the recipe that I'm going to give you calls for a little less, but the great thing about dressings like this is they last quite a while. So you might just be making it with the intent of tonight's meal, but if you make a little extra, it'll last a good week in the refrigerator, and then you can use it for other things. So we're going to make a little extra of the dressing. And then I'm going to add equal parts of oil and acid. So to that end, I'm using a good oil. In this case, it's an extra virgin olive oil. And then roughly equal parts then of a good light colored vinegar. I like to use white balsamic. It's got kind of a natural sweetness to it. So roughly the same amount, a little less on the vinegar because I'm going to add some fresh lemon juice. So again, I said equal parts oil and acid. So this kind of goes in the acid category with the vinegar. And so you've probably seen this trick before, but you smush the lemon to kind of loosen up the juice on the inside. And then I'm going to cut it in half and then use a fork to render out the juice, of course. But then I also like to take then the kind of pulpy bits here and push those into the dressing as well, because not only do you get, of course, the citrus and the kind of acidity of that, but you also get those bright little pops of the lemon flesh in there as well. So seeds out, and if a random seed goes in there, it's not a huge issue. Don't worry about it. Usually it'll get stopped in the dispenser here when I pour it out. So don't stress yourself too much if a seed jumps in there. And they're also perfectly edible. They're not great for your teeth, but they're you can totally eat them. All right, so that to the side. So I have my plain yogurt, my acid, and my oil. I'm going to put a good spoon of a coarse ground mustard. Name like Hans, I kind of got to go for the German mustard. So that is exactly what this is. It's a coarse grain Dijon mustard. And then the equivalent of a couple cloves of garlic. And we talked about it before in this series, but if you don't know, garlic is an antifungal, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and I'm using fresh, not that watery stuff in a can. This is fresh minced garlic. And it also is a natural preservative too. So you have in there the acid, the oil, the garlic. I'm going to put a little salt in there, and all of those things are natural preservatives that will help keep this a little longer. In the fridge, a good spoonful of salt. Now this is actually a salt and white pepper blend. So I've got kind of equal parts salt and pepper, but in this case I'm using white pepper, mainly so I don't want to have the little tiny pieces of pepper in there. This has a little lavender flowers in there too. It's a fancy salt blend that I play around with. But again, just salt and pepper is what you're looking for there. And then last component is going to be honey, and I've got a good solid tablespoon of honey going to go in there. A note on this is you don't put the honey first. So the honey I'm putting towards the end so that it doesn't go to the bottom of the vessel and stick to the sides. So in this kind of arrangement, if you have a sticky ingredient, whether it's a jam, a jelly, or honey, or molasses, or whatever it is, or even something like miso, you don't want to put that first because then it sticks to the jar and you'll never get it free from the bottom. But that's the basis of my salad dressing. Make sure the top is shut. Otherwise, you're going to be wearing it as a human dressing and it'll go all over the place. And then give it a great shake to get all that homogeneous, and you can see the little mustard seeds in there. It's an awesome dressing. And you think of salad dressings for salads, but it's also good on leftover grilled asparagus or even a hard-boiled egg. If you're looking for just a quick snack, having something like this in the fridge, or if you want to dip crudité in there, little baby carrots or celery, that's a great little thing to have in the fridge at all times. So super easy. It's got a nice little bite to it. It also has the probiotic of the yogurt, because it says right on here there are billions of probiotic bacteria, and I don't know whose job it is to count them, but I'm going to take their word for it that there are billions in here. And so that is going to be our salad dressing. So one of the foods that I'd mentioned was spinach, and of the dark leafy greens, that's the one you think of first when it comes to that high calcium content, and that's what we're looking for, trying to get the most calcium. Now, I've done so many other recipes where protein, I had thought for so many years, was the thing that I need to be focusing on to rebuild muscle, especially after surgery. It helps in the healing process, but calcium wasn't something that I really put to the front of that list, so protein was always king. So now I'm trying to adjust that based on my current needs, and that's something that I think is important wherever you are in your life, whether you're healthy or you just had surgery or you're 2 years out or wherever you are, you kind of have to shift and be able to adapt a little bit to what your situation is. I put some, rather than croutons, I had these wonderful little fig and sesame seed crackers that I'd picked up. That's going to be my crunch on the side. One of my favorite foods on this planet are figs. And we've done series on figs. I have done entire cooking shows on figs. I have about 13 or 14 fig trees on my property. But I was elated to learn that it's a very high calcium food. So of course I'm going to include figs, but I don't always have access to fresh figs. Right now I'm lucky enough that I do have some trees that are still producing. But dried figs, and there are a lot of different ways you can get them, are excellent as an addition to anything, really. I mean, they're great in salads. They're great mixed into sauces. And the dried ones, you can rehydrate them. This particular variety that I have here are still moist enough to be almost like you would have raisins in a salad, or craisins, or dried cherries, but they're still moist enough to add some fun texture. And then you also get kind of more bang for your buck on these dehydrated ones, because a lot of the moisture has pulled out, and so you're left with a concentrated flavor, but also the residual nutrition is deep in there too. So great snack to have on hand, great addition to a salad. The other thing is cheese. So I mentioned before, dairy is what we all think of, but again, lactose is sometimes a difficult thing when you don't have a stomach or you have a partial stomach. Lactose is a tough thing to digest. But if you have bacteria that are doing that digesting for you, again, the billions of bacteria that I mentioned, that's part of the process in cheese making. So here I'm using a Latin American cheese called panela. There's another one called cotija. There's feta. There's all sorts of different dry cheeses. There's ricotta salata, but this one I like because it doesn't take the flavor in any one direction. It's very mild. It's very soft. So it's a nice dry crumbly cheese, and easy to digest. Nothing too astringent in there. So that's panela, but you can use any one you'd like there. And then let's put our salad dressing. Again, we've got a lot of calcium-rich components in here, and gonna put that. You can toss this dressing on there too, but since it's a creamy dressing, I typically like to put those kind of over the top. And then I have some fresh figs. I'm a bit of a fig nerd, and the fig season really was about a month ago for me here on the traditional kind of brown turkey or Celeste figs. This is a variety that I got a couple of years ago that's called Lsu Gold for the fig nerds out there. And the cool thing about it is it stays green when it's ripe, but it has that very strawberry colored flesh on the inside. And sort of the idea behind this variety is the birds typically know when to attack the fig tree when they start turning this kind of a purplish, brownish, ruby color. But the ones that are still green when ripe, like this Lsu Gold variety, the birds pretty much leave them alone. So that means more figs for me. The squirrel's a little smarter than the birds, but it's just a delicious fig. And again, if you don't have access to the fresh, any fruit on here would do well. You got the dried figs on there as well, but that's just a great little pop of fruit and flavor and texture. And then lastly, I'm gonna use some Hemp Heart, which are basically the seeds of the hemp plant. High in protein, 10 grams of protein. It's a solid source of calcium, not as high as the other ones, but it's one of those things that the more you can layer on here, not only are you kind of challenging the palate and making it interesting, so you don't feel like you're just eating the same thing over and over again. This adds a little bit of crunch, but it does add a nice kick of protein as well as calcium to the dish. And that's a beautiful little salad. And the great thing is, this leftover would be honestly good warmed up with some leftover rice. You could make a kind of a hot side dish from all of these components. Maybe not exactly this, but each of these things could be worked into to another dish. And that's kind of the way I like to cook or think about cooking, is that, this might be what I'm in the mood for today, but tomorrow I might think that I'm gonna scramble, this with some eggs with a handful of spinach. Or even as a snack, you can take and even take a fig and kind of cut it open, kind of like a flower, and then put a little cheese inside of here, and that on its own makes just a wonderful little snack. Some people even wrap them in bacon or for a little appetizer. But honestly, when I was first diagnosed, my kind of immediate thought was, what would be my last meal, like sort of my perfect last meal? And the first thing that came to mind to me was some fresh figs, a little slice of brie or my favorite cheese, and that right there to me is a celebration of the season. It's a celebration of food and everything that I love. So as usual, I'm always focusing on the nutrition aspect, but I'm also trying to focus on that celebration of food, the enthusiasm, the different components and how they come together to make something new. But it's also about who's sitting across the table and what the conversation was and what the music was playing. So try to think of every time you have a chance to sit down and eat a meal, it's more than just the sum of its components. It's something bigger and sort of broader than just that. So on that note, let's wrap this up and have a lot more to discuss and more fun things to explore, with the idea that you get to control what goes into your machine. A lot of things you can't control in life. This is the thing you can control. Have some fun with it. Rather than thinking of how do I avoid time in the kitchen, put on your favorite tunes, figure out how do I spend more time in the kitchen. take care of yourself. If you can't take care of yourself, take care of others, or do both. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time here in the Gesundheit Kitchen. Take care.